Darkness hung heavy over the small town of Fouke, Arkansas, a place surrounded by thick woods and cut through by muddy creeks. The silence of the nights was usually only broken by the distant chirping of crickets and the wind blowing through the trees. But lately, that silence had been shattered by something far more terrifying. The locals had started telling unsettling stories, tales of a huge shadow moving among the trees, of glowing eyes that reflected in the dark, of inhuman screams echoing through the swamps. Some thought it was just a bear wandering out of its territory. Others figured it was mass hysteria, but there were those who knew it was something more. Dylan Clark, a former sheriff of the town, had never been one to believe in legends. He'd served on the force for almost 20 years, dealing with criminals, missing person cases, and even the occasional poacher. But now, retired and living alone in his cabin near the swamp, he couldn't ignore the signs. And before we get any further into this gripping story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps us bring more content like this to you. Now back to the story. It all started when Joe Hanley, a local hunter, was found dead near Boggy Creek. His body was mangled in a way that didn't match any known animal. The coroner said it could have been a bear, but Dylan had seen bear attacks before, and this was different. The tension in town ratcheted up when two kids disappeared in the woods. They'd been playing near their house when, according to a witness, a dark figure emerged from the trees and snatched them. The townspeople organized search parties, but no trace of them was ever found. Fear gripped Fouke. Dylan, even in retirement, couldn't stay on the sidelines. Something inside him told him he needed to figure out what was going on. He started investigating on his own, interviewing locals, and revisiting the places where the disappearances had occurred. The clues were scarce, but there was a pattern: deep tracks in the ground, claw marks on the trees, and a strong, rotting smell in the air. But the real turning point came when Dylan found an old video recorded back in the 1970s by a group of hunters who tried to capture the creature. The video showed a massive figure covered in dark hair, moving with incredible speed through the swamp. In the last few seconds of the recording, the creature turned to the camera and its glowing eyes stared right into the lens. Then, the screen went black. The mystery was now real. The Fouke monster existed, and Dylan was determined to find out what was really lurking in the woods. The biting wind whipped through the twisted trees of Boggy Creek swamp, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else. A putrid odor, like meat rotting for days. Dylan Clark stood beside the creek, holding a flashlight that cast distorted shadows on the surrounding trees. He'd investigated plenty of crime scenes before, but this one was different. That old video he'd found kept replaying in his mind. The creature, whatever it was, seemed aware of the camera, like it knew it was being watched. He looked at the ground. There were footprints there, too big for a man and too wide for a bear. The mud around it was churned up, as if something gigantic had dragged itself to the water's edge. Dylan crouched down and touched the mark with his fingers. 3 deep claw marks tore through the ground on the side of the footprint. This wasn't human. He snapped pictures of the prints with his phone, feeling a shiver run down his spine. He knew that if he took this to the current sheriff, no one would believe him. But to Dylan, the facts were clear. Something was hunting in those woods, something dangerous. The next day, Dylan decided to seek out Henry Lawson, an old recluse who lived alone on the edge of the swamp. Henry had told stories about a forest demon in the past, but few took him seriously. When Dylan arrived at Henry's cabin, he found the old man sitting on the porch, rolling a cigarette. His deep-set grey eyes watched Dylan warily. "I thought you were done looking for trouble, Clark," Henry said, exhaling smoke slowly. "Trouble found me first." Dylan showed him the pictures of the footprints. "Ever seen anything like this before?" Henry took the phone and squinted at the screen. After a few seconds, he let out a long sigh and tossed the cigarette on the ground, grinding it out with his boot. "That ain't a bear, and it ain't no wolf. That's him." "Him who?" The beast. Dylan crossed his arms. You ever seen this thing? Henry was silent for a moment, then picked up a flask and took a long swig before speaking. I saw it 40 years ago. I was young like you. Me and some buddies went into the swamp hunting deer, but we ended up finding something else. He got up and went into the cabin, returning a few seconds later with an old rifle, dented and scarred, with deep marks on the wooden stock. This is what saved me. Dylan took the gun and examined the deep cuts in the wood. They looked like claw marks. What happened that night? Henry lit another cigarette with trembling hands. We tracked it deep into the swamp, heard the screams first, and then we saw the eyes. It circled us, moving fast between the trees like it was hunting us. I shot at it, hit it, but it didn't do no good. It just roared and threw me against a tree. When I woke up, my friends were torn to pieces. Dylan felt his stomach churn. What happened after that? It disappeared into the woods, and since then, no one talks about it. But I know it's still out there, waiting. Dylan was silent, absorbing the information. I need to find it. Henry laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of amusement. Then you're dumber than I thought. That same night, Dylan decided to go back to the spot where he found the footprints. This time, he took a rifle and an audio recorder. If this thing existed, he wanted proof. The swamp was even quieter than usual. No crickets, no frogs croaking. That meant one thing: there was a predator nearby. He followed the footprints to a deeper section of the woods, where the fog blanketed the ground like a ghostly shroud. The rotting smell was even stronger. Dylan took a deep breath, keeping his finger on the trigger of the rifle. Then he heard a snap. He whirled around, pointing the flashlight into the darkness. The beam illuminated the trees, revealing only distorted shadows. But something was there. He could feel it. Another sound, heavy footsteps breaking branches, and then the eyes appeared. Two yellowish orbs, glowing like fire, reflecting the light of the flashlight between the trees. They were too high to belong to any ordinary animal. Dylan felt his heart race. The thing was looking right at him. The silence lasted only a few seconds before a deafening roar tore through the night. Dylan didn't have time to think. Something gigantic came charging toward him. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the swamp, but when the smoke cleared, the eyes were still there, and they were closer. Dylan froze. The thing hadn't fallen. On the contrary, now it was coming after him. The roar echoed through the forest, a grotesque, guttural sound that made Dylan's chest vibrate. He pulled the trigger again. Another volley of shots ripped through the darkness, but there was no cry of pain, no impact, nothing. The flashlight trembled in his hand as he raised it again. The eyes were still there, but now closer. And then the thing moved. Too fast, way too fast for something that size. Before he could react, Dylan felt a brutal blow to his chest, like he'd been hit by a tree trunk. His body was thrown backward, and he crashed to the muddy ground, gasping for air, his vision spinning. The rifle flew from his hand, disappearing into the darkness. He was unarmed. The weight of the thing was closing in, each step shaking the ground. The fog around him seemed to recede, revealing for the first time what stood before him. It was immense. Covered in dark, matted hair, caked in mud, the Fook monster was easily 8 feet tall. Its muscular body resembled a gorilla, but its arms were even longer, with gigantic hands and razor-sharp claws. The face was a grotesque mixture of human and animal, with a flat muzzle and huge teeth gleaming in the light of the fallen flashlight. But what scared Dylan the most wasn't its bestial appearance. It was the intelligence in the creature's eyes. The thing knew he was there, and it was enjoying it. Dylan tried to crawl backward, but the beast stepped forward, its hot, fetid breath washing over the man's face. The yellowish eyes stared down at him, and for a moment, it seemed like the thing was studying him. Adrenaline surged through Dylan's body. He rolled to the side and grabbed a broken tree branch off the ground. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The creature roared again and lunged. Dylan instinctively thrust the piece of wood in front of him. The monster's claw came down hard, snapping the branch in two, but the movement gave him just enough time to throw himself to the side and run. His feet sank into the mud, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The sound of the footsteps behind him was terrifyingly fast. The thing was hunting. The forest opened before him, and Dylan saw a fallen log near the creek. He jumped over it without hesitation, sliding down the muddy bank on the other side. Behind him, the beast jumped too, but the log couldn't support the creature's weight. The rotten wood gave way, and the monster crashed into the dark water. Dylan didn't stick around to watch. He ran as fast as he could, not looking back until he finally reached his truck. His heart was pounding, his lungs burning. He unlocked the door with trembling hands and climbed inside, slamming it shut. He fumbled for the keys in his pocket and tried to start the engine. Nothing. He turned the key again. The engine sputtered, and that's when he heard the sound of the undergrowth breaking behind him. The thing was already there. Dylan looked in the rearview mirror and saw the colossal silhouette emerging from the trees, illuminated by the truck's headlights. The creature was covered in mud, but its eyes still glowed in the dark. He turned the key one last time. The engine finally roared to life. Without thinking, he floored it. The truck lurched forward, kicking up dust and mud. Dylan didn't stop to see if the thing was following him. He just drove as fast as he could down the dirt road until he finally saw the distant lights of town. Only then did he realize what had just happened. He'd survived, but now he knew the truth. The Fook monster was real, and worse, it wasn't alone. When Dylan finally reached town, still caked in mud and trembling, he went straight to the police station. Sheriff Paul Hargrove was an old acquaintance, but like everyone else, he'd never believed the legends about the creature. But that night, seeing the state Dylan was in, he knew something was wrong. "Clark, what the hell happened to you?" Dylan ran a hand over his sweaty face and gasped, "I saw it." Paul frowned. "Saw what?" Dylan looked directly at him. "The beast." The sheriff crossed his arms, skeptical. "You know what you're saying? You want me to call a doctor?" "I'm not crazy, Paul. It attacked me, it's out there." Hargrove sighed, sitting down in his chair. "And let's say I believe you. What do you expect me to do? Organize a hunting party?" "Exactly," Dylan said firmly. "Because there's not just one." The sheriff went silent. "What do you mean, there's not just one?" Dylan closed his eyes for a moment, trying to organize his thoughts. He remembered the eyes glowing in the darkness. But there weren't just two. There were other pairs of eyes, scattered among the trees, watching. "They're not alone, Paul." The sheriff frowned, uncomfortable. "You think there's more of these things out there?" Dylan nodded slowly. "I don't think. I know." The room went silent, and then, from outside, a terrifying scream cut through the night. Dylan and Paul exchanged a look. The sound was coming from the middle of town. The Fook monster wasn't hiding in the woods anymore. It had come out to hunt. The scream tore through the night like a blade. Dylan and Sheriff Paul Hargrove exchanged glances for a moment before both rising at the same time, drawing their weapons. The police station was small, and the front door led straight onto the main street of Fook, Arkansas. When they stepped outside, the scene looked like a nightmare. The streetlights were flickering, casting unsteady shadows on the old buildings. A pickup truck was stopped in the middle of the street, with the driver's door wide open and the engine still running. The glass on the passenger side was shattered, and a trail of fresh blood ran across the asphalt. Further down the street, a woman ran out of a convenience store, screaming and pointing towards an alley. "There! It's in the alley! Oh God, it got Jimmy!" Dylan didn't hesitate. He ran, holding his flashlight and gun steady. The sheriff came right behind him. The alley was narrow, suffocating, with overturned garbage cans and torn bags scattered on the ground. The smell of rot was stronger than ever. And then they saw it. A massive shadow, over 8 feet tall, crouched over a body like a predator guarding its prey. The Fook monster. Paul gasped. Dylan raised his gun. "Hey, you son of a bitch!" he shouted, trying to get its attention. The creature slowly raised its head. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the light from Dylan's flashlight. It didn't run. It didn't snarl. It just stood there, staring at them. Paul cocked his gun. "Let's end this." But before either of them could fire, a second pair of eyes appeared in the darkness. And then another and another. The shadows shifted. Dylan felt a chill run down his spine. Oh God, there's more of them. The tension was unbearable. Dylan felt sweat trickling down his face as the shadows moved around them. The first monster remained still, watching them as if it were waiting for something. Then the growl came, low, deep, almost a command, and they advanced. Dylan fired first, hitting one of the monsters in the chest, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. The creature staggered, but kept coming, angrier than before. Paul fired 3 times. A scream echoed. The shot grazed the shoulder of one of the beasts, who stumbled but didn't fall. Dylan knew they couldn't win. "Run!" he shouted. The two turned and bolted back towards the main street. The sound of the creatures roaring behind them made the window panes vibrate. When they reached the sheriff's truck, Dylan practically dove inside, while Paul started the engine as fast as he could. The beasts were almost upon them. The truck lurched forward, fishtailing on the asphalt. Dylan looked in the rearview mirror and saw the huge shadows running after them, too fast for something that size. But then they stopped. The beasts reached the edge of town and simply stood there, watching the truck disappear down the road, as if they didn't want to leave the woods, as if they had a territory. Paul stopped the truck a few miles away, both still gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" Paul panted. "How many were there?" Dylan rubbed his face with trembling hands. "At least 4, maybe more." Paul looked at him. "And they didn't follow us?" "No." The sheriff took a deep breath. "So what does it mean?" Dylan looked at the dark road ahead. "It means they don't leave the woods because they don't have to." Paul frowned. "What are you talking about?" Dylan swallowed hard. "What if they've always been here? And what if the town—" He hesitated, trying to organize his own thoughts. "What if we're the ones in their territory?" Silence fell between the two. It was a horrible idea, but it made sense. For decades, the town of Fouke, Arkansas, had lived haunted by the myth of the Fouke monster. But maybe humans were the ones that have always been invading. The next morning, Dylan and Paul returned to the police station to report what had happened. But they couldn't tell the truth. Who would believe them? How could they explain that there were predatory creatures living in the shadows of the forest, watching the town all along? In the end, Jimmy Calloway was officially declared dead from an animal attack. The other missing people received similar explanations, and the town moved on. But Dylan knew it was far from over. In the following days, he began researching old documents about Fouke. He wanted to understand how long these monsters had been there. That's when he found something chilling. In the earliest records of the town, dating back to 1856, there were reports of mysterious attacks in the area around Boggy Creek. Farmers complained of giant shadows moving in the forest, and of people disappearing without a trace. And then he found what changed everything: a land expropriation report, dated 1861. In it, it was written that a local Native American tribe had been evicted from the lands of Boggy Creek by the U.S. government. They warned the settlers that the forest was not a safe place, but no one listened to them. The last section of the report made Dylan's blood run cold. They told us that these lands belong to the gods of the forest, creatures that have always been here and will always be. Dylan closed the file slowly. The beasts weren't an anomaly. They weren't an accident of nature. They had always been there, and now they were ready to reclaim what was theirs. That night, Dylan took his truck and drove to the edge of the forest. He stood there alone, staring at the darkness between the trees. They were there. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. The eyes, watching, waiting. Finally, he turned around and drove away. But he knew that it wasn't over yet. The time of humans in the town was coming to an end, and the reign of the beasts was just beginning. Time passed. The scars of the battle in the forest began to fade, as did the memories of those who preferred to deny what had happened. The town of Fouke, Arkansas, returned to its routine. The stores opened, the children ran through the streets, the churches rang their bells. But for those who survived that night, nothing was ever the same. Sheriff Paul Hargrove retired a few months later. He didn't talk about what happened at Boggy Creek, but he never entered that forest again. If anyone asked, he simply changed the subject. Henry Lawson, the old hunter, left his cabin and disappeared from Fouke. No one knew where he went, and the bodies of the hunters who died that night, they were never found. The town, as always, moved on, but Dylan Clark never forgot. One night, almost a year after the events in the forest, Dylan drove to the edge of town, where the trees began to close in around the road. He got out of the truck and stood there, alone, staring into the darkness. The forest was silent, no wind, no sound of crickets or birds, but he knew they were still there. The beasts never left, because they never had to. They were just waiting. And Dylan realized that, for the first time, he wasn't afraid, because now he understood. Fouke didn't belong to humans, never had. And in the end, the beasts weren't invading the town. It was the town that had invaded their territory. And maybe the real monster had never been the creature in the forest. Maybe the real monster was man. Dylan took a deep breath, looked at the trees one last time, then turned and got into his truck. He drove home and never went back. The forest was left behind, and with it, the secrets that should never have been disturbed. What did you think of this ending? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like to support our work. We'll see you in the next video.